Hello, I'm Toby Fox from the 1.5 million new homes campaign sponsored by Redloft, and I'm here in Slough today, and I'm here to discover how Slough Borough Council can contribute more to the government's ambition of getting 1.5 million new homes built. And I'm here with Pat Hayes, who is Executive Director of Regeneration and Housing and the Environment at Slough Borough Council. And in this episode, I'm talking to Pat about what it takes to build and sustain a career in public sector housing delivery. Pat, tell us a bit about the responsibilities that you hold in your role.
Yeah, I've got a really mixed portfolio which runs from everything from parking and the dreads of CPZs through refuse collection, street cleaning, parks, all aspects of both running our council housing stock, but also looking after temporary accommodation and homelessness, planning and building control, and various other bits and pieces that go with all those. So it's a mixture from regulatory services, direct delivery, refuse DLO, manual workforce, and then, at the top, the very small part of it in people numbers, but really important in policy terms, is the regeneration function.
Right. Yeah.
And how we regenerate and transform Slough and its economy. So really mixed, ranging from the yes, we need to get the refuse collectors out on site today, how much salt do we put on the road, through to 20-year strategy in terms of green belt, grey belt, etc.
And in terms of your background and your experience elsewhere, what are you most prepared for when you took that role on?
Well, I came here, funnily enough, I was only I wanted to go and work outside London, so I didn't really achieve much there because I'm just physically outside the boundary, and that's about it. And I was only going to come here for 6 months to do housing and property.
Yeah. And
that sort of escalated, as they say, into getting offered a permanent job to do housing and property. I've been here about a week and someone said, oh, you do planning, don't you have to have planning as well? And then after being here about 9 months, it was, well, you can have environmental services. And then we've been building up a regen function because Slough had lost that regen function and capacity in its initial financial meltdown. So, that's what I'm doing, and that's how I came to be here. So, having decided I was going to move outside London, I'm now trying to move Slough back into London. So, yeah.
What's the toughest part of all of that?
I think the hard thing I'd enjoy least, it's the aspects of council corporate management and bureaucracy, particularly when you're under financial pressure and you have to go through a committee to get, spend of £500 approved and all that sort of stuff. And that's really hard. And also really hard with a very stripped out, hollowed out organisation where you really haven't got the backup people to be able to do stuff, and you end up having to do a lot of your own, nitty gritty things, and just haven't got people to say, well, could we do that? And that's the challenge for us, is very, very shrunk organisation, huge opportunity, but how do we actually and how do we raise some money to support that? And it's that managing in a very impoverished financial structure and a very bureaucratic financial structure as well, given the fact that we're in this sort of intervention.
Yeah, with commissioners.
Yeah.
And how does that reporting work? I mean, who do you report into, and what are the practicalities?
We have an entirely conventional local authority structure, chief executive, leader, etc., etc. I mean, it's almost like a private company being in administration. You have the commissioners who sit there; they have to clear reports and really significant decisions. Actually, that has very limited day-to-day impact and isn't a problem for the organisation. It doesn't really add much bureaucracy. The bureaucracy that's there is probably added by ourselves because of the history, or we've got to do everything exactly by the book and have all the governance structures and things like that, that's more challenging. But in many ways the commissioner model isn't bad per se, it's not unhelpful.
And flip side, what do you enjoy most?
Oh yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm a very varied person, that I do enjoy the nitty gritty of going and talking to the refuse collectors and saying, no, you need to do that. And I'm really proud of what we're doing around food waste at the moment. On the other scale, obviously, I love the strategic placemaking, thinking this is what we could do here. We could really make something of this place rather than the slightly drab surroundings that we have at the moment, and bringing some real urbanism to bear.
Your path to your exalted status as executive director it's not very orthodox. So tell us a bit about the route to where you got now, and how planned or unplanned it was.
Yeah. Totally unorthodox and probably chaotic, but I mean, affected by circumstances and all sorts of things. When I last year at university, I thought I was going to go and work for the GLC. That was always my ambition.
The Greater London Council.
The Greater London
we have to
Council,
say that now because it's ancient history.
Yeah, indeed, and I'm ancient history. But and Ken Livingstone and everything else that went with that. Of course, Mrs Thatcher came along and abolished the Greater London Council. So I'm then thinking, what do I do? And I wanted to go into the public sector. I didn't want to work for a capitalist bank or accountants and things like that. And I ended up as a graduate trainee with London Borough of Wandsworth.
Yeah.
Which at the time, ironically, was obviously Mrs Thatcher's favourite flagship council. Yeah. But they appointed some graduate trainees, one of which was me, one of which, the other ones I started on the same day, went on to be Chief Executive of a major housing association. It is a big name in the housing world.
Who's that?
Geeta Nanda.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we started on the same day in Wandsworth.
OBE.
Yeah, indeed. And I went into the Technical Services Department, as it was then called, which was planning, and very much the things I manage now, actually. Reporting to the then borough architect. So my first actual sort of job was going through all the files for Battersea Power Station.
Oh, wow.
And then, obviously now it's finally been built out. So that's something that's gone on through my whole life, has been this Battersea Power Station in the background. I then did a number of local government jobs. And I became what was known then at the time as a policy officer, which was somebody who was basically a gopher for the chief executive and writing reports and doing other stuff. And as part of that, I ended up, and I can't remember exactly when, doing all the European programme bidding. I've always been very, I suppose, a cosmopolitan person, and always endeavoured to speak French. My interest in cycle racing and football and things like that has always meant that I've been interested in Europe and things like that. So I ended up running European programmes. And
that's from Leyton Orient's great Champions League run.
Absolutely, no, but all over the place. But misspent youth in the Paris suburbs and everything. But and I ended up doing European social fund bidding and things like that. Yeah. Actually, it's Hammersmith and Fulham, actually, because we got an urban bid through for the urban programme from the EU. And it was, well, you've got this money. Of course, there's no structure in those days to run these things. So I end up, therefore, running the programme.
Spending the money.
Of this regeneration scheme. And that's how I got into urban regeneration, because it didn't really exist. This is back in the days when the Romans were in charge, so that you didn't have regeneration as we have now. Yeah. You had planning, environmental services, the borough engineer, the chief planning officer, the et cetera, et cetera.
All in their silos.
All in their boxes, doing their own thing, but nothing really called urban regeneration. So I suppose I was one of the first people in that space where regeneration was just kicking off and not just being planning and not just being engineering. And then I ended up ultimately running this big single regeneration budget scheme, which was for now it's again, another old building, the Millennium Dome, as it was then known, and this big trans-borough programme of delivering employment and skills training for the 5-6 boroughs of the Thames Gateway around the Millennium Dome. Yeah. And I suppose I then moved on to being a director of regeneration housing, picked up environment and other things. So I think I've always been one of those people who can, pick something up and just apply skills. I've got absolutely no professional background. I've got a 2-2 in politics, as a degree, which is absolutely useless. So, and, I know a bit about the French Constitution works and a bit about the history of Pakistani politics, but not a lot of use really, and no practical qualification.
But you said very specifically that when you left university, you didn't want to go and work for a bank. So what does that say about the values that you need to have to work in the public sector, and how important do you think that is? I mean, do you need to have a kind of civic sense of purpose?
I think it helps. I don't think you need to, and I think there are lots of people who, it's just a job and it's a reasonably secure, not particularly well paid necessarily, but solid, and you get a pension and all that sort of stuff, and there are loads of people, and that's absolutely fine. I think it can be advantageous, and I think it can keep you going in the bad times if you actually I'm doing this because I want to achieve something. I'm not doing this because I just want a 9-to-5 job. And I think it's useful and helpful, and I think it can be useful in terms of thinking ahead, because my motivation is I want to do something, I want to actually make a difference and change things for the better. And I think if you have that sort of driver, it helps. Yeah. But I think there are perfectly competent people who just go through and they tend the wheels of any organisation, and indeed you can switch as well. I mean, I think that I know colleagues who very public sector orientated who've switched and had very successful careers in the private sector, doing the right things in the main.
In your long and varied career, what kind of skills have you developed and that are most useful to you now, and how transferable are those skills if you were to do something completely different?
I mean, I think this one skill is to quickly acquire knowledge about things, and and develop a view about things. So it's an ability to, I think, learn fast, process information quickly. I think the skills, actually, in most of what I do, it's about dealing with people and negotiating and influencing, being able to articulate, being able to actually formulate an idea and respond to changing circumstances and work around creatively around, actually sometimes around rules and set assumptions. You know, that the public sector in the UK is very, very rule-based, very, very, well, we've got a policy so we must do it.
Yeah.
And you've got to have that sort of creative mindset to think, how do we actually going to get the right outcome here rather than following the process? And how do we either make the computer say yes or turn the computer off and pretend we haven't turned it off?
But that's a fine line you're walking there, isn't it? Between sort of bending rules and breaking rules effectively. And of course, the public's view and perspective on local authorities is very, they want caution, they want probity, they don't want people freewheeling and bending the rules around themselves. So how do you walk that line?
I think it's an interesting challenge, and I think there is a real separation between probity and flexibility. And we have to be, and I think if you actually look at what people say about local authorities, they see them as hidebound, rule-based organisations. Actually, so I'm not sure it's necessarily true that people want local authorities to be cautious. I think they don't like them to be hidebound and rule-based necessarily. They want them to be honest and not corrupt, which is the strength of the British system in the main. Compared with lots of European countries, our local government system is relatively high standards of probity and low levels of corruption. But I think they actually would like their local authorities to be more innovative. And we always are portrayed as being these people who like going around telling people you can't do things. And I think probably most people would like the local authority to be going around telling them they can do things, or to be actually be doing things for them, and be seen to be doing things for them. So I think it's getting that balance right, and I think that's the real secret. Because as a former colleague once said to me, planners tend to always say, someone brings them a scheme, they go, I don't like that, bring me another one, which doesn't help anybody. Rather than going, I see what you're trying to do, but you need to do this. And that's where we've got to be, and that's the space I think that I've always tried to be in, particularly around development stuff. You've got to make some money, you've got to do this. How can we get a win-win, both for the community and for the people doing the development, for example?
Do you think that approach is formed particularly because of your slightly unorthodox path towards what you're doing, and would a kind of more orthodox path hold you back in some ways?
It may not hold you back. I mean, I think I am the way I am partly because I've gone into this with no professional training or inculcation in a particular mindset. I don't think I'm there to uphold the historic approach of a particular profession, or indeed instilled with the ethos of a particular profession. So in many ways I do think that makes it easier. But it's not to say there aren't great people, you can't do great things. I mean, take Peter Bishop, for example, really creative, probably one of the most creative planning directors, in London over the last generation or so.
You came across him in?
Never actually worked with Peter directly, but when he was at the LDA, through what he was doing at Camden.
The London Development Agency.
The London Development Agency, and
indeed. Camden Council.
And again, he came from a very conventional planning background, planning degree, everything like that, but able to really think outside the box and a real urbanist. And I think
and he's, just to set the context, so he's the man behind King's Cross, effectively, from a council perspective.
From the council, and the main creator of King's Cross is the place it is now, which is very different from some other, one could possibly say, more sterile developments elsewhere. And that's, I think, a great example of someone who is genuinely an urbanist, and I think that's possibly the problem. And I was talking about this earlier, about, we used to have a council, used to have the borough architect, the borough planning officer, borough engineer. We tend to see all these professions. We've never had urbanism as a thing in the UK, and what I suppose I've attempted to do, coming from none of these professional backgrounds, is just to be an urbanist.
And you mentioned Peter. We've also spoken before about Fred Manson as an influence on your career. How important is it how important has it been in your career advancement to have mentors or influences? Is it necessary? How do you find them?
I think it depends on personality to a degree. I've never had anyone who I'd say is not a personal mentor. There have been people I've looked at and thought, I think you really get it, and and I want to be more like you, and I'm going to do that. And or you've shown that you can do this. And I think that is important. It's to be able to look at people and think, yeah, they've done it the right way, or they've done it differently, or these are people with really great ideas.
So in that context, tell us a bit about Fred. You met him, he was in Southwark.
He was in Southwark when I was in Lewisham, and doing all that South Bank stuff, which now people just take for granted. But if you think what was there before, and the way Southwark operated, Southwark was essentially a housing department of municipal housing with a council attached to it. It was always joked that the director of housing was more important than the chief executive and could sack the chief executive. And all the members were all council housing tenants. So what Fred did in terms of that vision for the South Bank, which is now just accepted, was massive. And the council using its leverage, they didn't have any money really, so they didn't do a lot of that development themselves. They did that through the planning system, and that that was something I then thought, and what we did in Ealing, that we had very little direct investment there. It was all through the planning system. We changed that town centre using the planning system and negotiations around it.
Describe your leadership style for me, either how you see it or how you think colleagues see it.
I see it as slightly chaotic, I must admit. I think colleagues would probably say that I probably don't suffer fools gladly. I'm probably unconventional. I think people do tend. What people have always said to me, they've always found that I've really backed them up and supported them, and I've been prepared to always, deal with the difficult decision with politicians, have the difficult discussions if they're getting stick. Always stand up and protect people, even if I might tell them afterwards, I think you were in the wrong. And I think that. So for me, and I think I've had this from 360-degree feedback. It's always standing up for people and staff, giving people direction. Being clear as well, and helping solve problems as well. I'm a natural problem solver. I think it's probably my greatest strength. In terms, it's always a bit cliched about management style. I suppose more of a, it's a bit of that coaching style and a bit of the leadership style. I've spent way too much of my life involved in sports. I'll probably do a bit of the sport manager, sort of football manager approach on occasion, which can be good and can be bad.
What do you? So on that, you're running a cycling team at the moment for young women as amateur cyclists, just helping them towards sort of elite levels. What are the sort of cross-pollination between that and your work in regeneration?
It's funny, I was thinking about this the other day, but it's about people management, about dealing with very limited resource, how you motivate people in fairly demoralising situations to a degree, in terms of, one, local authorities are not particularly popular with people and not particularly well resourced. Women's sport and cycling is fairly undervalued, certainly. And now do you think, well, don't worry about the fact we're getting paid nothing, we can still make a success of it. Results aren't necessarily so easy to quantify.
Okay, that sort of immediacy.
Someone once said to me, as director of education in Lewisham once said to me, how long is this project going to take? I said, it's going to be quite quick. She said, what do you mean by that? I said, about 5 years. And she went ballistic. She said, you call 5 years quick? I said, in our world it is, because you've got 2 years to get to planning, 3 years to build it, and whatever, And I think you don't have that immediacy, and you are, now I'm involved in lots of stuff that I won't live to see completed. And that's, and you just have to accept that, and that is an important part of it. And there are other stuff that I was involved in when I was young, which now you think, well, that was either quite good, or actually it was a couple of things. I thought, well, that was a disaster, wasn't it?
And some of it's being ripped out now.
So
you've had stuff built that is now
I've actually been involved, and when I was a younger officer in Barking and Dagenham, we did a scheme which is actually interesting how things change, putting fencing and everything around the bottom floor of council blocks to create private defensible space.
Of course,
in my last incarnation in Barking and Dagenham, we took all that out because it was all tatty and jaded and everything, and I think, which idiot put that up?
What a crazy idea.
Idea was that, and the same with the Gascoigne estate. I was involved in the Gascoigne estate and creating all those little areas, and then obviously, of course, that all comes out in creating a proper different public realm, and ideas change and what's norm and sensible, It's a bit like, the thought of smoking on the tube now would be mad, but that was...
But importantly, that's part of sort of career success and career advancement is learning lessons, isn't it? It's adapting and evolving how you see things. And in that light, what advice have you got for the future leaders in regeneration and placemaking and delivering new homes?
I think the thing, I would definitely, don't just think in the UK and don't just think of wherever you are, whether that's London or Manchester or whatever. Go and see what other people are doing in other places. One of the most important things to me, I think, is being been involved in organisations which organise study trips to go and see Freiburg and Malmo and all those places, and you just learn, and it just, you know, osmosis into yourself in terms of ideas and what you can do. I think
you went to Utrecht, didn't you?
I went to
just back.
Yeah, we went to Utrecht the other week to have a look at stuff, you know,
Yeah.
and you know, and it's still important to carry on learning and to look at what other people do and different approaches, because there's always some things that you can bring in, other things you can say, well, that obviously isn't going to quite work in our context or setting, but there might be something that we can draw from that. And there are other things which say, well, that clearly isn't the way to do it, you know. So one of the things I would say is, you know, go and engage abroad, you know, read Jan Gale and people like that, go and see what's happening elsewhere, be prepared to innovate always. You know, I think too often people want to, you know, planning and things like that, very sort of, you know, policy and the rules, but try and be creative. Think about, you know, what we're doing about long-term change of place and long-term evolution of society, rather than just running through the process.
So have a bigger picture of
have that bigger picture of what the role is, and also think in terms of what you can influence. You know, throughout my career, I've always been, you know, ignored my dad's advice, who having been in the Navy during the war, who said never volunteer for anything. I've always been someone who, you know, well, if there's something there, I'll volunteer, I'll give it a go, I'll give it a go. You know, and always. So I think the thing I'd say to younger people is, you know, always volunteer to take stuff on.
Yeah.
And think that you have got, you know, you have got agency, because you can change things and you can do things. And you can think, that was my small contribution, but that was different because I did it, you know, rather than thinking, oh, that won't happen, the machine will stop it. You can always influence the machine.
A big thank you to Pat Hayes at Slough Borough Council for sharing some of the personal side in housing delivery. And in our next episode, we're going to be talking to Pat's colleague, Nital Rajput, about her career path and how she started a career in public sector housing delivery. So tune in for that. Hit subscribe if you want to be sure not to miss it. And hit like if you think we're doing a half decent job. It would be much appreciated. In the meantime, thank you very much indeed for watching 1.5 million new homes. Sponsored by Redloft.